Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ivy Ruiz, and alongside my colleague Avery, we will be moderating this presentation. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the powerful connections that have brought all five of us together. We are part of the incredible BIPOC and Animal Wellbeing Collective, a community built on shared experiences, emotional support, and the celebration of each other's skills and excellence. And in this space, we use our voice, our voices matter, and our experiences deserve to be at the forefront of every platform. Today, our esteemed panelists, who will introduce themselves, will share their personal experiences as Black, Indigenous, and people of the global majority in the fields of veterinary medicine and animal sheltering. They will offer insights into burnout from their unique perspectives, explore the principles of healing justice as they relate to decolonizing systems within the animal well-being, and present practical solutions rooted in healing justice, community care, and collectivism. These stories are not shared for personal gratification, but as a means of fostering understanding, connection, and change. You may use the chat and the Q&A function on WOVA, but we may not have time to answer questions during the session. We also want to acknowledge that today's discussion will touch on mental health challenges, including behaviors and symptoms that may be sensitive, triggering, or activating. Please know that this content is not a substitute for professional mental health care. If at any point you need to step away, we completely understand. Your well-being is a priority, and we encourage you to honor your personal boundaries. With that, let's begin. Dr. Chumkee Aziz, would you like to start us off with a quick intro?
Yes, thank you, Ivy, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to the conference organizers for having us. I'm Chumkee Aziz. I go by the pronouns she and her, and I'm a veterinarian working as a shelter medicine specialist. More importantly, I am a Bangladeshi American, and I am raised and living in Houston, Texas. So really happy to be here with the panel and all of you today. Thank you. Thanks, Nadia.
I'll go next. Yeah. Thanks for having us, everyone, and for being here. My name is Nadia Oseguera-Ramon. My pronouns are she, her. I am based in Los Angeles. I work in animal welfare. I'm a part of the BIPOC and Animal Wellbeing Collective, but today I'm showing up as myself, as a Latina with parents who migrated from Mexico. And I'm going to be talking about, like Ivy said, a lived experience regarding mental health, burnout, and the most beautiful part of it all, community care. So I'll hand it over to you, Mel.
Hi, sa face, may anawste Mel. Paimamisto kai simromni tajnativo. Nice to minga kai avenlane, te avenbakstale. So my name is Melinda Trueblood-Stimpson, but I prefer Mel. I'm Roma, Native, and of Jewish ancestry. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm going to be tackling some of the more boring side with the definitions. So my part will be a little bit heavy, but hopefully we can get through it, and the others should have a really enjoyable time for you today.
Would you like to kick us off with the poll that we've put together, Mel?
Yeah, so just again, those content trigger warnings, it's hard to cover all of them, but we try to at least give you the big ones. And so what we'd like to do is a group exercise on Mentimeter. What it does is it creates a word cloud for us. So just give me a second here. Let me present it. And if you can't use Mentimeter, no worries, it's all right. But if you're able, we would love for you to try just so we can see in real time a nice little group exercise here. There we go. So what you'll do is you'll go to www.menti.com. It's going to ask you for a code, which is 83470282. And what we'd like to ask for you today is, when you think about healing, what 3 words come to mind for you? So in 3 words, what does healing mean to you? I'm going to try to do it along with everyone as well. Oh, look at that. That's amazing. Give everyone like 30 more seconds. But you can see some of the larger text tends to be words that multiple people have entered. It's like forgiveness, peace, compassion, repair, freeing, justice, improving, grieving, connection. This is lovely. Thank you for humoring me for this. All right, we're going to keep that in our back pocket as we go through some of the slides here.
Thank you, Mel, for sharing that word cloud with us. So many great words for what healing looks like for folks. But before we get too deep into healing, let's talk about burnout first. I think in the animal care and animal welfare space, and even for those not in these fields, we've encountered a feeling of burnout at some point or another. Some of us stay in a burnout mode. And so can you all share your thoughts surrounding this topic? Nadia, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Ivy. So yeah, burnout is such a common thing that we talk about. And so you probably already have heard the definition, but I want to ground us with it. In short, burnout is a combination of mental and physical exhaustion, and it occurs due to prolonged stress that feels like it cannot be alleviated. So it's that sense of hopelessness that essentially continues to perpetuate a cycle. Some of you might know that the symptoms can be physiological or psychological or both in worst case scenarios. Um, the psychological symptoms tend to mimic depression, anxiety, amongst other mental health conditions. So I just urge you, as you're listening to this information, if you are experiencing any mental or physical health symptoms, to please seek medical care. Another thing that I want to just touch on is that there are common causes of burnout. So it's not like it just comes out of nowhere. And a lot of these causes are actually rooted or, embedded into organization culture processes. Um, we're not immune to that in the nonprofit sector or in industries that are aimed at helping people. So a very common example, which will probably resonate with a lot of folks here, is there's, the employee that wears too many hats or wears a lot of hats. Then there's also the employee that takes the work home. But if we actually stop and think about what this means is you're doing the job of multiple people, but you're only getting paid for one job. When you're bringing your work home, it means that you are so overworked that you can't get your work done during your work hours. And this is not to blame employees, but these behaviors are typically perpetuated by rewarding it and making it sound like that's somebody that is dedicated to the mission instead of somebody that is strapped so thinly that perhaps they might be struggling with burnout or heading in that direction. So what if instead commitment to the mission meant more rest so that we can self-preserve and more community care so that we can together build sustainability for our movements. So as I said, our sectors, which tend to be nonprofit or other industries helping folks, they are not exempt from these different organization cultures that contribute to burnout. We are also not exempt from practicing exploitive, capitalistic types of practices. Now, I don't use these words lightly. I use them from my own lived experience, having worked for big retailers and then also having worked in the nonprofit sector. I see many comparisons within the two. The big difference is how we paint them. In a big retailer, they unapologetically do not care about employees and value revenue over employee well-being. In the nonprofit sector, we might say things like, our donors matter a lot to us, or we are, wanting to produce metrics. And so while it might seem like a well-intentioned thing, at the end of the day, you are still putting metrics and donors over the well-being of employees. Another thing is that in both industries, there's no cap, or it's not a norm to cap CEO salaries. There are many, and please look this up. If you ever see a commercial on the TV for a nonprofit, look up the CEO's salary. I encourage you, it's a fun exercise. So the point I'm trying to make here is that CEOs in nonprofits become millionaires while those same resources that are going to them are not trickling down to the employees who are stuck at a salary cap. And I bring up salary and metrics and employee well-being because all of this contributes to the workplace culture and how folks feel. So before I hand it over to Dr. Aziz, who's going to give some other examples of burnout, I want to also emphasize that those of us that are working in industries where we're helping others, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, we're usually driven to this work because of our lived experience and because the mission resonates with our own experience. So with that, many of us might come into our workplaces with pre-existing trauma. Some of us might experience trauma in the workplace, and I emphasize a lot of trickling down the resources, because if you imagine a person that is in a constant state of stress in the workplace and at home and can't afford to buy food or pay their rent, that person is going to be more likely to burn out and to stay in a state of burnout. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Aziz. And again, this is just a very high level overview that I gave, and I highly encourage you all to please do some more research on this topic.
Yeah. Thanks, Nadia. And I don't think I need to belabor this, but I do want to share some specific examples from veterinary medicine. I'm a veterinarian, so I can only speak from my perspective and my lived experience. But y'all have probably heard that this is an epidemic in veterinary medicine and across veterinary professionals, not just doctors, but also nurses and assistants and client services. All folks in veterinary medicine, when surveyed recently, will say things like over 50% of your staff are experiencing burnout, post-secondary traumatic stress, and low mental health. And that's 50% across all of your types of staff. So leadership, veterinarians, and front desk staff. And that's really worrisome because that's a really high rate. When we look at vet students, we see that vet students have a much higher rate of already burnout and compassion fatigue compared to students in other health professional education systems. That's worrisome. And I will say that there's also been new studies that show that right now about 30% of vets who are being surveyed say that they're going to leave their current position. And within that, over 50% say that they actually want to leave the entire profession. So imagine you went to school, you took on all of this debt, you care so much, but you're so burnt out that you're willing to walk away from what you thought was your life's calling, right? And it's really worrisome because a lot of what this points to is that there are big disconnects within ourselves and our companies and our organizations. And that comes from, my sense is, it comes from this burnout. And in our context, what disconnection really means is that we just are not connecting anymore with our patients, with our clients, with our colleagues, with our leadership. There's a disconnect across the board when there's so much burnout. And unfortunately, what research and statistics show is that this probably starts, these feelings start actually in the veterinary education system. Veterinary school, I can attest to this personally, is incredibly expensive to even get into, right? It's a very elite system. And from the beginning, we are taught very early on that if a client can't afford gold standard medicine, then perhaps they don't deserve a pet. Surveys have actually shown that only about a quarter of veterinarians believe that all people, despite their circumstances, deserve a pet. So that means about 3/4 of veterinarians don't believe that. They don't believe that everyone deserves a pet, which truly to me seems like a true human societal right. And most veterinarians, unfortunately, don't believe that. And unfortunately, a lot of that starts early in vet school. We don't have as much research as human medicine does, but something that really struck me when I was reading recently is that in human medicine, when they do studies looking at students' attitudes towards underserved patients in human medical school, it turns out that students develop less favorable attitudes towards underserved clients and patients as they progress in medical school. And we're concerned that the same thing is happening in veterinary school, that something happens while we're in school where we are taught to disconnect and feel that people who are more vulnerable are less worthy of pet ownership or good care. And it's really concerning because this leads to so much burnout, because at the end of the day, we can't, you literally graduate from school and you walk into practice and no one can practice gold standard medicine every single day. It is not a reality. But in school, we're set up to think that that's what we should be doing. And so there's these numbers, again, I'm not going to belabor them. They're not surprising. They're not surprising that so many people want to leave, so many people are burnt out, and that it's the overall effect is that it's leading to not as good care, especially for people who are most vulnerable and pets who are most vulnerable. I think I'm going to pass this. Let me make sure I get our flow correct here. And I'm going to pass this over to Mel.
Yeah, so as discussed, vet med is kind of the perfect case study in the worst way. So I'm sorry to pick on vet med, but I'm going to pick on vet med a little bit as well. So what's the root of all this trauma? What's the root of all of this? If we had to pick a single nebulous topic, for me, as a decolonial scholar, I would say it's colonialism. So nearly every vet med leader discusses making industry changes that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion whilst creating an economic sustainable future. That's a quote from the AVMA, by the way. Yet here we are, still in crisis. For example, veterinary medicine is considered one of the least diverse professional fields. It's probably one of the least diverse in all of healthcare. So this is from 2013, but 96% of veterinarians were white in the USA. It's got a little bit better. We're down to 90%, but it's still not great. So this is from Dismantling Racism, but we cannot dismantle racism in a system that exploits people for private profit. If we want to dismantle racism, we must build a movement for economic justice. I'm a very visual person, so this is from Dr. Rupa Mara over in Human Medicine World. It just helps you visualize all the facets of colonization, because I know colonization, colonialism is pretty broad and kind of hard, but I refer a lot to this flow chart to see where it's all intertwined, where we have white supremacy, patriarchy, trauma, capitalism, slavery, genocide. And of course, we talk a lot about burnout, a lot of animal industries, not just vet med, not just vet med. So we talk about burnout, but if we are going to talk about burnout, we never hear about anti-capitalism. And so why is that? And this is just some artwork, you don't hate Mondays, you hate capitalism. So capitalism and corporatism are sides of the same coin. I know this is kind of hard to see, but this is the 11 monopolies in the United States. As vet med folks might know, Mars Monopoly owns Banfield, VCA, Blue Pearl, Antec, Wisdom Panel, Anacura, Linnaeus, Royal Canin, Imes, Eukanuba, and so much more. And sometimes people don't understand when I talk about, trauma, genocide, and all those other facets of colonialism, how it relates to vet med. But a perfect example is, did you know the CEO of Northrop Grumman, the weapons manufacturer of the military, sits on the board for Merrick, as in Merrick Animal Health? So these things are all intertwined. We're down to 10 monopolies today, so got a little bit worse. So we say trauma is shaped by capitalism and colonialism. This is an example of that. Sometimes people mistake capitalism as just like the exchange of goods and services and currency, but that's not accurate. Capitalism is a very specific system. It's a system that uses wealth to accumulate even more wealth. It's not about just using wealth to acquire what a person needs to survive. It's a very specific system created by colonial rulers to separate the worker from our means of production. And then, of course, oversimplified, corporatism is capitalism on steroids. So as of 2023, about 20% of veterinary facilities are corporations in Canada. And then here in the United States, about 40% are corporations. So that's 1 in 3 general practice veterinary clinics that are owned by corporate consolidators. So it's projected by 2033 that 60 to 75% of veterinary medicine in the United States will be owned, which are not always required to report to the Federal Trade Commission, by the way, because it's animals, not humans. We're in that weird gray area. So just keep this in mind. This is how far we've come here. This is from about like 1985 to 2025. And again, it's projected to get even worse. So why does this matter? So veterinarians working in corporate practices reported feeling more pressure than those in private practice to generate revenue and see more clients per shift. Seems pretty basic, I know, very basic research. And this is from the human medicine side. So the Association of Independent Doctors found that every day, hospitals and private equity groups are buying up medical practices, turning independent doctors into employees. That trend is not healthy for patients or for doctors, and it hurts the healthcare system. When doctors give up their independence to work for health systems, studies show that healthcare costs go up, quality of care goes down, access to care is even more limited, jobs are lost, and then communities suffer financial harm, and doctors feel less satisfied. So everybody pays: the doctor, the nurses, the technicians, and the patients. So whether you want to hear it or not, capitalism is causing the general public to distrust veterinary medicine and other animal industries. For vet med specifically, how many of us have heard you're only in vet med for the money, you're only in this for the money, right? So where does that come from? To get to the root of that, we've got to talk about capitalism and thus colonialism. So as early as 1984, capitalism and corporatism in human medicine has been dubbed the second sickness. But social and revolutionary medicine, it's not new. We're going to discuss this a little bit later and we give some healing justice examples for you. This is just artwork from Wendy Anderson that I love. It says, money is a construct. It's only effective because we believe it has value. By believing, we give power to the wealthy and contribute to our own oppression. It's time to focus on building our own power and find something real to believe in. Community, solidarity, and mutual aid. So going back to laying the foundations to healing justice decolonization, this is a quote by Dr. Watson that I love. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound with mine, then let's work together. And this is a quote from a wonderful book. It says, healing justice is both a paradigm and a set of practices that invites practitioners to heal themselves at the same time that they heal the world. It is a response to the generational trauma that has accumulated in the mind-body continuum that is today calling for compassionate and wise attention. So healing justice is ever-evolving, transformative practice that asks people to heal themselves, heal each other, and heal the world around us. So if I had to break it down, just 3 tenets for you: healing ourselves, healing others, healing the land or the world, or whichever word you prefer. So it's decolonial, it's collaborative, it's radical. It's about continually interrogating oppression, fighting against state violence, embodying the biopsychosocial spiritual model. It's indigenous and nomadic in origin, anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and so much more. And as you can imagine, to discuss healing justice, we also have to discuss decolonization, because colonialism is one of the major traumas that have caused a lot of these issues. And if our healing justice doesn't incorporate some form of decolonization, we could replicate the same destructive, individualistic, and colonial structures that have caused our trauma to begin with. So decolonization, in my words, is the meaningful, deliberate, and active resistance to the forces of colonialism, whether that's capitalism, patriarchy, whichever aspect of oppression you want to focus on. Decolonization is a deliberate resistance to those things. And decolonization's primary purpose is to overturn the colonial structures and realize indigenous liberation. And what does it mean to colonize? So again, very oversimplified. I can't stress enough how oversimplified this is. But for today's purpose, we're going to just label it as invading and exploiting, violently uprooting and displacing, hoarding power and resources. Healing justice inherently embodies decolonization because it's about sharing this power and resources. So decolonization is not performative DEI initiatives, affinity groups, diversity recruitment, and other things. So mutual aid, worker labor collectives, anarchy, but all of these things could be facets of someone's decolonial praxis. So it's not to say like none of these things are part of decolonization, but just that decolonization goes a lot deeper than these things and it can incorporate a lot of different areas. If that makes sense. So this is just a quote I love. Decolonization is a call to remember it was not always this way, and it does not have to be this way. Start slow, struggle with meaning, words, and action. Each day, find out how you can meet the basic needs and legitimate expectation of yourself and others. The struggles of human history are what set the stage and terms for decolonization. And this is by Dr. McLean. So tying this all back into healing justice. So there were several parts that Nadia touched on about how we enter these professions because we care about animals. But under settler colonialism, that empathy gets weaponized. It gets weaponized as making you stay late without overtime pay, and making you work on things that aren't a part of your job description. For example, I have to translate a lot. I don't get paid extra even though I'm doing 2 jobs. If anything, I sometimes get in trouble for slacking off at technician or assistant because I'm busy translating. So our empathy gets weaponized under colonialism. How many times have you heard some of these English phrases? You can't help others unless you help yourself first. You got to put your mask on before assisting others with their mask. Or you can't pour from an empty cup. In the colonial world, we're taught that we must protect our peace, help ourselves first, self-care before all else, and so forth. So all of this comes from individualism. And again, I love my visuals. So this is from my good friend Aaron, showing individualism when it comes to humans over animals versus interconnectedness. In my culture in particular, we see animals as relatives and plants as ancestors. So we see interconnectedness. We don't see that hierarchy between human and animal. So individualism has roots in Western philosophy, but it's a byproduct of colonialism because it's found outside of the Western world as well. Helping others does not have to mean self-sacrifice. Not everyone needs the mask, cup, or whatever analogy works for you first. In medicine in particular, we don't treat patients based on blanket rules. Instead, we triage. Healthcare at its core requires assessment and prioritization, not individualistic rules. So why in animal industries do we rely on this rugged individualism instead of a healing justice triage model? Where are the triage-based survival approaches to healing? In collectivist communities, which there are thousands of worldwide, we don't say me first. Instead, we triage the situation as a group. Instead of focusing on the self first, we collectively ask ourselves, who needs help most urgently? And just a disclaimer, because there are over 5,000 distinctly indigenous and nomadic nations, tribes, clans, bands, etc. worldwide, I don't want to tell you that our people don't have a concept of self-care. We do. Self-care does exist, but I'm confident in saying how we approach the self almost always is from an entirely different lens than how the colonial world approaches the self. So we utilize collectivism over colonial individualism. You can't pour from an empty cup. It's an okay saying. I don't hate it. But what if your cup actually isn't that empty? What if your definition of emptiness has been corrupted by colonial individualism? I'm going to read that again just so it can really marinate. You can't pour from an empty cup is an okay saying. But what if your cup isn't actually empty, but your definition of emptiness has been corrupted by colonial individualism? So in a healing justice approach, your cup does not have to be overflowing, and it doesn't even have to be full to be in community. You do not need to possess any special skills to build community. An indigenous-centered reciprocity care is constantly circulating. Contrary to what Western concepts like altruism teach, reciprocity is not about keeping score. It's not tit for tat. It's not about what you can give, but what we can do together. And again, just from my experience in indigenous nomadic communities, I've witnessed people with far less material wealth than the rest of the world have way more community support. Appalachia in particular is one of the poorest regions in this entire country, yet the richest in community support networks. Our survival on the reservations and encampments and in rural areas in general requires collective care and healing justice. Our cups are not as empty as we've been conditioned by colonialism to believe they are. Prioritizing collective care and healing justice is the best survival strategy for all of us.
Thank you, Mel, for giving us that critical perspective on collectivism and capitalism and the need to decolonialize vet med. To close us out, let's just talk about some more survival strategies and solutions that are rooted in what we're talking about here. So healing justice, community care, and collectivism. Nadia, what insight do you have for us on this topic?
Thanks, Avery. So I am going to feed off what Mel was sharing and offer you some translate it, I guess, in a way that folks can be like, okay, let me take this back. And I say translate, we've talked about this on the back end, is that sometimes, folks might hear decolonizing. They might think like, wait, what does that have to do with what's happening today? But it's, as Mel showed us, it is very much present. So if you're feeling like, okay, where do I go? What do I do? Hopefully what I'm about to share will have a full picture for you. So it's not rocket science, it's community care, what I'm going to share about. It's something that, as Mel shared from their lived experience, it's already practiced in indigenous communities. I come from Mexican descent, and it's practiced also in my community. And I know in other BIPOC and in queer communities, this is already in practice. So it's very likely that people that you're working with are already doing this within their own circles. So we can bring that forward into the workplace, hopefully, and it won't be something completely new. So just first of all, community care is going to center the needs and the well-being of everybody, but especially the most impacted people. So when people who are most at risk or who are being harmed the most receive the support and care that they need, naturally everybody else in that community is also going to benefit from that. Secondly, community care ensures that there's an open line of support that goes both ways. We should not assume that because we're not in harm's way today, that we won't be in harm's way tomorrow. So it's about, like Mel said, reciprocating. It's not about keeping tabs or who did what. It's really just about understanding that the care that you're pouring into your community is going to come back to you when you need it. In the context of a workplace, I shared earlier about salaries and how much people earn and how that impacts their well-being. But another thing related to salaries is that typically the people who are earning the lowest pay are going to have the least decision-making authority, yet decisions being made on their behalf are going to impact them the most. And the people who tend to be the most protected are the ones who earn the highest salaries. So that's going to be people on the C-suite, board members, donors. And so what I'm going to propose is that we flip that on its head. Some practical examples that I do think folks can take back to their organizations. And please keep your minds open to the possibilities. So first of all is decentering the needs of any one or two people. So whether that is the executives or the donors or board members, that is one easy step. And I'm not saying that their needs don't matter, is that you are removing them from the center and you are trying to center everybody's needs. So it's like those graphics that Mel showed where we're all intertwined. We are all contributing to the same mission. Another thing, and you can actually use an online tool to review your employee wages and then compare that against the cost of living in your community. You're going to very likely, especially if you're in the nonprofit sector, you're going to very likely find a big discrepancy, and you're going to likely find that a lot of your employees are living at or below the poverty level. An even better exercise that you can do is go directly to your employees and ask them about their cost of living. You already know how much money they're earning, so you can try to supplement some of that. Other things that you can do, especially as leaders, is to make rest and recharging a norm and discourage people from working during their time off. So a way that you can do that is by setting very clear expectations of what is a priority and what is not a priority. We don't need to create a false sense of urgency when it's not there. And that is one of the ways that you can avoid people wearing multiple hats and taking work home. Another thing is to make it a norm and celebrate collaboration over competition, encourage community care over just looking out for ourselves, and practice collectivism over individualism. There are a couple things that I want to say specifically for people who have more resources and more bandwidth is two activities that you can do. So one, if mental health care is not covered by insurance at your organization, you can look up local mental health resources that are either low cost or free, and you will for sure find that within your community so that it's more relevant to the people that you're working with. You can also spearhead redistributing resources and make mutual aid a norm. One easy example is to have a food and resource exchange program going, and it doesn't even have to be anything official. It could just start by maybe you bring snacks to the office one day, or maybe you have some clothing that you're not wearing anymore, and so you bring it to see if anybody wants to grab some. And by doing those little things, I guarantee you that you're going to see other folks doing the same thing. So I want to circle back to capitalism to emphasize that, as Mel shared, it is a force in our society. It wants us divided. It wants us competing. It directly encourages resource hoarding. And the consequences that happen because of, we're constantly competing for resources and other people are hoarding resources. That's why we're here today at this conference, because of those consequences. And many of us are in our line of work, we're trying to dismantle some of that. So I'm going to leave you with two things before I pass it to Dr. Aziz. So one is a question, which is, how do we expect to truly restore the harms of capitalism when we are weaving its principles into the work we're doing? And the second is a call to action, which is, in order to bring about social justice, we must slowly chip away at practices within our sectors that are rooted in capitalism. Otherwise, those practices will continue to eat away at our energy, our momentum, and the justice that we seek. And if that wasn't warning enough, I'll say it in a more spooky, short way. If we don't work towards ending capitalism in our sector, it's going to continue to work strategically and tirelessly to end our movements. So I hope y'all can sit with that, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Chumkee.
Nadia, yeah, that hits the nail on the head. I'm going to share in just the last few moments some specific tools, especially in your workplace, especially in veterinary medicine, hospitals, clinics, shelters. It's really important to remember that when we talk about burnout and stress, profit over the individual, what's happening here is that it's important to remember that most of the causes of stress come from systemic problems in our workplace. But you'll notice that all the solutions we have talked about forever in our industry are focused on the individual's need to practice self-care, right? And so a lot of that has been like, we've basically outsourced the employer's responsibility to help us and protect us and support us to us as individuals, which is not doable, and it's not realistic, and it's not fair. So we really need our industries and our organizations and our leaders to set up boundaries for us to protect our well-being in our workplace. And so we have to convince people to value us as individuals, our clients as individuals, our patients as individuals over profit. And I know that's a very big intangible concept, but there are some ways that if you're a leader or if you're working in a shelter or a clinic, that there are ideas that you can discuss or implement. So a lot of this is around boundaries. I will tell you that simple things like have a really clear-cut policy around what to do with clients who walk in 5 minutes late or 10 minutes late, or you close at 6 p.m. on the dot. What is the policy for someone who comes in at 6:01 with an ear infection? That's not emergent, right? Don't put that responsibility on your staff. Have a really clear-cut policy that's formalized that everyone sticks to, so it's no one's individual responsibility to bear, right? Have a really clear lack of no tolerance for discrimination or bullying from clients. Set really formal boundaries around personal time. So like, don't just encourage hey, folks, don't email on Sundays. Don't worry about it. Set a policy that says, do not send emails on Sunday. Do not send emails after 7 p.m. Whatever it is, don't just hem and haw. Set it as a formal policy, right? And then things like have appropriate staffing. In a lot of our situations, our systems are running in a deficiency without any redundancy. So when one person isn't able to come into work, everything goes quickly to difficult places, right? And so have redundancy, make an effort to ensure that you have appropriate staffing every single day, right? Have appropriate and up-to-date equipment, something even like washer and dryers that are effective. We see this in so many shelters where the washer is broken, and they're struggling, and the volunteers are having to take laundry home. Some really easy wins, simple things that we can do for our staff and our team members to help them do the best job possible. Because remember, when we can't do meaningful work in our jobs, that actually contributes to burnout too, right? And it's like statistics show that literally, if you can give your staff 10 to 15% of their day, allowing them to do what's most meaningful to them, that in and itself will reduce burnout load. So I really share this. Everything that Mel and Nadia said, there are really some basic tools we can try to implement to protect our staff, because self-care is not enough. It doesn't cut it. We have to support each other and protect each other. I know we are at time, so Ivy or Avery, do you want to close us out? Mel, I know we don't have time for our second mentee.
It's fine.
No, we just want to thank you to our panelists and invite everyone to join us if you have any questions in the Q&A or on Hooga, or join us in the chats if you want to continue the conversation. And we thank you for your time and engagement, and remind you that healing justice is not just an individual responsibility, but a community effort. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you all so much. Don't forget to sign out of your Hoover room and then jump into the next room. We're starting trauma recovery yoga right now.